My children threw me out at 68. They didn't know I owned the house. I remember the sound of the door closing behind me. Not slamming. Not dramatic. Just closing. Quiet. Final. I stood on the front porch. The porch I'd swept 1,000 times, where I'd watched my children play as babies, where I'd sat with my late husband on summer evenings, and I realized I was no longer welcome in my own home. I was 68 years old. My hands were shaking. I had one suitcase. And my daughter's words were still ringing in my ears. Mom, you need to understand. This house belongs to us now. You can't keep living here like nothing has changed. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. Not then. I simply turned around, picked up my suitcase, and walked down those steps for what I thought might be the last time. But here's what my children didn't know. Here's what they never bothered to ask. And here's why that one moment of cruelty would change everything. My name is Margaret. I'm not going to pretend my life was extraordinary. It wasn't. I was a schoolteacher for 34 years. I raised 3 children, David, Susan, and Michael. I was married to a good man, Robert, who passed away 7 years ago from a sudden heart attack. We weren't wealthy, but we were careful. Robert worked in insurance. I taught 5th grade. We saved what we could. We drove old cars. We took modest vacations. We didn't eat out often. And every month, without fail, we put money aside. When the children were young, I remember standing in the grocery store, adding up prices in my head, putting things back on the shelf because we couldn't afford them that week. I remember sewing patches on their jeans instead of buying new ones. I remember telling them, maybe next year, when they asked for things their friends had. But I never told them how many nights I stayed awake, balancing our checkbook by lamplight, trying to figure out how to make it all work. I didn't want them to worry. That's what parents do, isn't it? We carry the weight so our children can be light. The house came to us in a complicated way. 23 years ago, Robert's aunt passed away. She was a quiet woman, never married, no children of her own. She'd been a librarian her whole life. She lived simply, very simply, in a small apartment. But she'd been wise with her money. When she died, she left Robert a modest inheritance. Not a fortune, but enough. We could have used it for so many things. A new car, college funds, vacations we'd never taken. But Robert had a different idea. Let's buy a house, he said. A real house. Something that's ours. Something we can give the children one day. So we found this place. A 3-bedroom house on Maple Street. Nothing fancy, but it had good bones. A backyard. A porch. Trees that gave shade in the summer. We put the inheritance toward the down payment. And then we worked. God, how we worked. Robert took on extra clients. I tutored students after school. We paid off that mortgage in 14 years. Every extra dollar went toward it. I remember the day we made the final payment. Robert and I sat at the kitchen table, and I cried. Not because I was sad, because I was relieved. Because I knew that no matter what happened, our children would have a foundation. A place to come home to. Robert put the deed in a safe deposit box at the bank. This is our security, Maggie, he said. This is what we leave behind. I didn't realize it then, but those words and that piece of paper would save my life. And then 3 years later, he was gone. After Robert died, the children rallied around me. At first, David, my oldest, helped with the funeral arrangements. Susan stayed with me for a few days. Michael called every evening to check on me. I was grateful. I felt loved. But grief is a long road. And as the months passed, I began to notice things. Small things at first. David started asking questions about finances. Susan began making comments about the house being too big. Michael started treating my home like it was his own, showing up unannounced, leaving messes, bringing friends over. The shift happened gradually. So gradually that I almost didn't see it. But then about 2 years ago, everything accelerated. They all came over one Sunday afternoon. I thought we were having a family gathering. I made tea. Set out cookies I'd baked that morning. But they didn't want tea. David sat across from me at the dining room table. The same table where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where I'd helped them with homework, where Robert had carved the Thanksgiving turkey every year. Mom, David said, his voice careful. We've been talking. This house is too much for you. The maintenance. The stairs. We think you should sign it over to us. For your own protection. I felt something cold settle in my chest. And where would I live? I asked quietly. Here, of course, Susan said quickly, patting my hand. But legally it would be ours. We'd handle everything, taxes, repairs. You wouldn't have to worry. Michael leaned forward. It's just common sense, Mom. If something happens to you, Everything's already settled. No complications. I looked at their faces. My children. The babies I'd rocked to sleep. And I saw strangers. I'll think about it, I said. David's jaw tightened. Mom, this isn't really something to think about. You're being stubborn. That word. Stubborn. That's what my concern for my own home had become. That conversation would come back to haunt them. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations. Now back to the story. After that day, the pressure became relentless. They stopped asking and started demanding. David began showing up with real estate pamphlets for senior communities. Susan made lawyer appointments without my permission. Michael became hostile, accusing me of being selfish. Then they started creating a narrative. We talked to your doctor, Susan said one afternoon. Dr. Patterson agrees you're showing signs of cognitive decline. That was a lie. I'd seen Dr. Patterson 3 weeks earlier. I was fine. Healthy. He told me so himself. But they were building a story. A story where I was helpless, incompetent, dependent on them. They changed the locks on my doors. When I asked why, David said it was for security. But he didn't give me the new keys. I had to call him whenever I wanted to go out. He would come over to lock up behind me, then unlock it when I returned. Like I was a prisoner. They started removing my things. Photos. Books. Robert's reading chair, the one he'd sat in every evening. When I cried, they told me I was being emotional, that I needed to let go of the past. They moved me out of my bedroom and into the small guest room at the back of the house. More practical, David explained. I lay in that narrow bed at night, looking at old crayon marks on the wall, and wondered how we'd gotten here. Then, in late August, they gave me the ultimatum. David called a family meeting. They all arrived on a Sunday afternoon. I'd made a pot roast, still hoping we could talk like a family. But when I brought the food to the table, no one touched it. Mom, Susan said, her voice flat. This isn't working. We've decided you need to move out. We've arranged a room at Shady Pines Extended Care. Move out. I whispered. This is my home. Michael slammed his hand on the table. This is our house now. We've been taking care of it. You've contributed nothing. I've contributed nothing? My voice broke. I raised you here. Your father and I. Dad is dead. Michael shouted. And you need to accept that this isn't your house anymore. The silence that followed was absolute. Susan stood up. Pack your things. We're taking you to Shady Pines on Tuesday. They didn't know it then, but they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. On Tuesday morning, I packed one suitcase. I didn't know what to bring. What do you take when your children are erasing your life? I packed practical things. Clothes. Medications. And one photo. Of Robert and me on our wedding day. At 9 o'clock, David's car pulled into the driveway. I met him at the door. Is that all you're taking? He asked, surprised. Yes, I said. We drove in silence. When we arrived at Shady Pines, the room was small. Sterile. It smelled of antiseptic. It's nice, Mom, Susan said too brightly. You have a window. They stayed 20 minutes. Then they left. David hugged me briefly. We'll visit soon. They didn't visit. I sat on the edge of that narrow bed, and for the first time since Robert died, I let myself truly cry. But I didn't cry for long. Because somewhere beneath the grief, something else was growing. That night, something in me hardened. Not anger. Resolve. The first week was disorienting. But I stayed quiet. I observed. And I thought. On the 8th day, I called my bank. I'd like to access my safe deposit box. I took a taxi there. Didn't tell my children. Didn't tell anyone. Inside the box were all our important documents. And the deed to the house. I held it in my hands, reading every word. The house was in both our names. Robert's and mine. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. When Robert died, ownership had transferred entirely to me. Not to the children. To me. I made copies of everything. Then I returned the originals to the safe deposit box. When I left the bank, I stopped at a coffee shop. Ordered a latte. Sat by the window. And I made a plan. I spent 3 weeks researching lawyers on the old computers at Shady Pines. I found Elizabeth Chun, elder law specialist. Excellent reviews. I called her office. My name is Margaret Anderson, I said. My children have taken over my house. They've told me it belongs to them. But I believe they're wrong. The receptionist's voice became warmer. Ms. Chun will definitely want to speak with you. On Thursday, I wore my nicest dress. I wanted to look competent, dignified. Elizabeth Chun was younger than I expected. But her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp. I told her everything. When I finished, she reviewed my documents carefully. Then she looked up at me. Mrs. Anderson, your children have made a significant miscalculation. This house is legally yours. Entirely yours. I felt relief wash over me. What they've done, she continued, and her voice became very serious, isn't just wrong. It's illegal. Elder abuse. Financial exploitation. You have grounds not only to reclaim your home, but to pursue criminal charges. The word hung in the air. Illegal. My children hadn't just been cruel. They'd been criminals. I don't want them in jail, I said. I just want my home back. She nodded. Then we'll start with a formal eviction notice. 30 days to vacate. Once they see the documentation, they'll understand they have no choice. Let's proceed, I said. They thought they had me cornered. They hadn't. The letter was sent certified mail, requiring signatures. 2 days later, my phone rang. David. Mom. We need to talk. About what? This letter. This lawyer. What's going on? I'm reclaiming my property, I said simply. Your property? Mom, we've been over this. The house is mine, I interrupted. Legally. Entirely. Robert and I purchased it together. When he died, ownership transferred to me. You have no claim to it. Silence. Then. You can't do this. I can. And I am. Where are we supposed to go? I don't know, David. Where were you planning to send me? Oh, that's right. Shady Pines. I heard him breathing heavily. We'll fight this. You can try. But I have the deed, the documentation, and witnesses who can testify that you removed me from my home against my will. He hung up. That evening, all three of them showed up at Shady Pines. We met in the common room. Susan's eyes were red. Michael was pacing. David stood rigid. Mom, please, Susan said. Can we talk about this? We are talking. David stepped forward. You're being vindictive. Punishing us. No, I said calmly. I'm reclaiming what's mine. There's a difference. We never meant to hurt you, Susan said, crying now. We thought we were helping. You thought I was incompetent. You lied about my doctor. You changed my locks. You made me a prisoner, and then you threw me out. We made mistakes, Michael started. You made choices, I corrected. And now you're facing the consequences. Please don't take the house, Susan begged. I looked at her. At all of them. The house was never yours to take. I'm simply reclaiming what you stole. We're your children. Michael shouted. Doesn't that mean anything? I felt old love twist inside me. Old grief. You're my children. But you stopped treating me like your mother. You saw my home and decided it should be yours. Without asking. Without my consent. You dismissed my feelings, my rights, my dignity. So this is revenge, David said. No. This is justice. There's a difference. They stayed another 10 minutes, trying to negotiate. But there wasn't anything to negotiate. Finally, they left. And I felt tired. Sad. And relieved. The eviction was handled through lawyers. My children tried to fight it. Hired their own attorney. Argued they'd been paying for maintenance, that I'd promised them the house. But none of it held up. 3 weeks later, Elizabeth called. They're dropping the contest. They've agreed to vacate by month's end. On the last Friday of September, Elizabeth accompanied me back to my house. I hadn't been inside in nearly 3 months. When I walked in, the house felt emptier. They'd taken things, furniture, decorations, items that had belonged to Robert and me. Susan came down the stairs carrying a box. She stopped when she saw me. Mom. I nodded. Susan. We're almost done. We'll be out by tonight. She hesitated. Set down the box. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. We were wrong. I looked at her. She meant it. I'm sorry too. I'm sorry it came to this. Will you ever forgive us? I thought about that. I don't know. Maybe. Someday. But not today. She nodded. Picked up her box. Left. David and Michael avoided me entirely. They loaded their cars and left without saying goodbye. By 7 o'clock, the house was empty of them. Elizabeth did a final walkthrough. Change the locks, she advised. And consider a security system. I will. After she left, I stood in my living room. My living room. The house was quiet. But it was mine again. I walked through each room slowly. Touching walls. Remembering. In the master bedroom, I stood by the window where Robert used to stand every morning. We did it, I whispered. We built something that lasted. And for the first time in months, I felt peace. That was 2 years ago. I'm 70 now. I still live in this house. Alone. By choice. My children and I have had limited contact. Susan calls occasionally. Brief conversations. She's working on herself, she says. Therapy. David sent a letter 6 months ago. A real apology. He acknowledged his manipulation, his greed. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply wanted me to know he understood. I wrote back. A short note. Thanking him for his honesty. Michael. I haven't heard from Michael. People ask if I'm lonely. Sometimes. Yes. But I'm not alone. I have friends. I volunteer at the library. I've joined a book club. I tend my garden. I live my life. And I have my dignity. My autonomy. My peace. Those things are worth more than company that comes with conditions. I've learned something important. Respect isn't about age. It's not owed simply because you're a parent or because you've sacrificed. But it is something you deserve as a human being. My children forgot that. They saw my age and assumed weakness. They saw grief and mistook it for incompetence. They saw an opportunity and took it. But intention doesn't erase impact. If you're caring for an aging parent, hear this. Your parents are not children. Not possessions. Not inconveniences to manage. They're human beings. With rights. With dignity. With lives that belong to them. You can offer help. You can have difficult conversations. But you cannot simply take over. You cannot decide what's best without including them. And if you're someone losing your autonomy to family members who think they know better, you have rights. You have options. Speak to a lawyer. Don't suffer in silence. Because your life is yours. Your home is yours. Your dignity is yours. And no one, not even your children, has the right to take that away. I'm Margaret Anderson. I'm 70 years old. And I'm sitting in my living room in my house, watching the evening sun come through the windows. This is my home. It always was. They thought they owned my house. What they forgot was that I still own myself. If stories like this matter to you, stories about dignity, justice, and quiet strength, I hope you'll subscribe. Because there are many more like this that deserve to be told. Stories of people who refused to be erased. Who stood up for themselves when no one else would. Who proved that age doesn't mean powerless. Thank you for listening.